All right, let's get into it. When we think about toys or sporting goods, we usually picture fun, right? Playtime, competition, all that good stuff. But behind those products, there's this massive global industry with a supply chain that's, well, it's incredibly complex. So in this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain and take a look at how these things are really made and the very real risks, both human and business, that are hiding in plain sight. And that right there is the whole point. The journey that a product takes from a factory floor all the way to a store shelf or a playroom, it is often packed with some serious challenges. And these challenges can have a huge impact on people's lives and, as you'll see, on a company's bottom line. So to really wrap our heads around the risks, we first have to understand the system itself. What does this global factory actually look like? How does this industry even work? Okay, so you can basically split the industry into two big buckets. One part makes toys and games, the other makes things like bikes, golf clubs, all that fitness equipment. Pretty straightforward. But that last point, that's where it gets really interesting. Manufacturing integration. What that means is some companies own and operate their own factories, but a lot of them don't. They pay someone else to make their stuff. They outsource. And that right there is the heart of the issue. The second a company decides to outsource manufacturing, it gives up a ton of direct control. This heavy reliance on outside factories, especially when they're in parts of the world where labor laws might be weak or just not enforced, well, it creates a massive blind spot. It's a system that, if you're not careful, can hide a whole lot of problems. So let's talk about those problems. Let's look at how this setup leads to real, tangible costs. Costs for the workers making the products, and major costs for the businesses themselves. It's really a two-sided coin of risk. First, the human cost, which is just staggering. We're talking about basic, fundamental rights. Are the factories actually safe to work in? Are people being paid a fair wage for their work? Are they being forced to work insane hours, way beyond what's legal or safe? And what about bigger issues like discrimination, or in the worst-case scenarios, actual forced labor? These are not just checkboxes on a form. They affect real people, every single day. And you know what? Those human issues translate directly into massive business headaches. Think about it. A factory with terrible conditions is a ticking time bomb for a shutdown, which means huge disruptions to your supply. If a story breaks about worker abuse, the damage to a brand's reputation can be absolutely devastating. That can trigger boycotts, government investigations, new regulations. It's just this cascade of financial and operational risk that all starts in that factory. So with all this complexity and all these hidden risks, how does anyone, a company, an investor, get a clear picture of what's really happening? You need a system. You need a standard for accountability. And that's where the SASB standards come in. The easiest way to think about these is like a universal translator. It's a common language that allows companies to talk about these big sustainability issues, like labor conditions, in a way that investors can actually understand and use. It's all designed to create clarity, so an investor can look at two different companies and really compare how they're managing these exact same risks. So how does it actually work? Well, it's pretty logical. First, the standards point out the specific disclosure topics that are financially material for an industry, in this case, labor conditions. Second, they provide concrete metrics, so you have actual numbers to measure how a company is doing. And third, they give you technical protocols. These are basically the instruction manuals, the rule books that explain exactly how to define, measure, and report the data. It takes it from a vague idea to a structured, repeatable process. Okay, so we've got the framework, we've got the rules, but how do you actually get the information? How do you take what's happening on a factory floor somewhere and turn it into data that you can actually analyze? The main tool here is something called a social responsibility audit. This is literally about getting boots on the ground. Auditors physically go to the factories. They inspect the facilities, they go through payroll records, they interview workers, and they check everything against a specific code of conduct. It's the on-the-ground reality check. Now, here's a crucial detail. Not all problems are created equal. The standards make a really important distinction. On one hand, you have priority nonconformances. These are the 5-alarm fires, the zero-tolerance issues, things that pose a serious, immediate risk to people's safety or the environment. Then you have other nonconformances. Still violations, for sure, but they're considered less severe. Telling the difference is absolutely key to knowing where to focus your efforts first. And all that audit work gets boiled down into a few key metrics that a company has to report. First up, how many of your suppliers' factories did you actually check? Because you can't fix what you can't see. And second, what did you find? What percentage of them failed the audit? And just as important, what was your corrective action rate? In other words, did you actually go back and fix the problems you found? So we've gone from this huge global industry all the way down to the nitty-gritty of audit data. Let's pull back out and answer the big question. Why does any of this transparency really matter? What's the bottom line? This line from the standard itself really says it all. This isn't just about doing the right thing, even though that's obviously a huge part of it. It is about smart business. Companies that get this right, that really manage their supply chains effectively, they protect their brand's reputation, and they're seen as less risky investments, which can literally make it cheaper for them to borrow money. So at the end of the day, all of this auditing and reporting, it isn't just a compliance exercise to tick a box for some annual report. It's actually a strategic tool. It's about building a stronger, more resilient business that's prepared for the future and is actively protecting its value for the long haul. Look, it's a complicated process, right? It happens thousands of miles away, and it's mostly invisible to us when we're shopping. But understanding that there's a framework like this, a system designed to bring these issues into the light, that's the first step. And it makes you ask a really simple but powerful question about the things we buy every day. What's the real story behind this product?